3:47 a.m., Caribbean Sea, a Venezuelan Su-30 pilot slams his flight stick forward, diving from 30,000 feet. He's aiming directly at a U.S. destroyer below, confident he's invisible on their sensors. He checks his instruments. Nothing. Silence. He believes he's executed the perfect ambush. But he's wrong. A U.S. SBIR satellite has been tracking his engine heat for the last 17 minutes. While he celebrates a victory that doesn't exist, the destroyer's crew already knows he's coming. The USS Gonzalez, a guided missile destroyer. The radar showed the contact dropping altitude at an alarming rate, heading directly toward the destroyer's position. Commander Marcus Webb stood in the combat center, watching the data stream across multiple monitors. The contact was closing fast. Too fast. He had maybe 2 minutes to make decisions that could determine whether his ship and crew came out of this intact or not. The rules of engagement were clear. Venezuela was not an enemy nation. Not officially, anyway. But a military aircraft performing an aggressive approach on a U.S. warship changed the entire calculation in seconds. The Venezuelan pilot, Major Carlos Restrepo, had been in the military for 16 years. He knew every system on his Su-30 like he knew the lines on his own face. The Russian fighter jet was one of the most advanced aircraft his country possessed. Armed with air-to-surface missiles, equipped with radar that could lock onto targets at significant distances, and painted in the distinctive camouflage pattern of the Venezuelan Air Force, the Su-30 represented real capability. Restrepo had flown this aircraft through storms, over mountains, and through tactical training scenarios that pushed the aircraft to its absolute limits. But he had never flown it in a situation quite like this. The problem was that Restrepo didn't fully understand what he was flying toward. The USS Gonzalez wasn't just a destroyer, it was a fortress that moved across water. The ship carried some of the most sophisticated defensive systems in the entire world. Phased array radar that could track multiple targets simultaneously. Electronic warfare suites designed to jam and confuse incoming threats. Close-in weapon systems, called CIWS, that could fire 3,000 rounds per minute with absolutely devastating accuracy. And every single system was networked together in a way that created an integrated defense bubble around the ship. What happened next occurred at the speed of modern warfare. The radar on the Gonzalez locked onto the approaching Su-30. The moment the lock was achieved, electronic warfare operators on the destroyer's bridge began transmitting signals designed to jam the Venezuelan aircraft's radar systems. These weren't simple radio interference. These were carefully calculated electromagnetic pulses that filled the airwaves with false information, making it nearly impossible for the Su-30's guidance systems to get accurate readings. Restrepo's radar screens went haywire. The clear picture he had been seeing suddenly filled with false targets, noise, and distortion. It was like trying to see through a wall of static. His weapon systems couldn't get accurate targeting information. The missiles mounted under his wings were now basically useless because they couldn't lock on to anything real. What had been a controlled tactical approach suddenly became a nightmare scenario. His aircraft was approaching the destroyer, but his weapon systems were essentially blinded. Then Commander Webb made the call. The contact was closing to within 12 kilometers. Inside the 12-kilometer boundary, the destroyer's CIWS systems were authorized to engage. The close-in weapon system is the last line of defense. It's a gun that fires 20mm rounds in such volume and with such precision that it can shred incoming aircraft, missiles, or threats at extremely close range. The system is controlled by computers because no human operator could possibly react fast enough. Radar guides every single round. The CIWS powered up. The rotating barrel came alive, tracking the incoming Su-30 as it continued its dive toward the destroyer. The system calculated firing solutions automatically. All that was needed was the order. Commander Webb looked at his weapons officer. Every second counted. The Su-30 was now within engagement range. At this distance, once the CIWS opened fire, the Venezuelan aircraft would have almost no chance of escape. But then, something unexpected happened. The Su-30 didn't continue on its attack vector. Restrepo, realizing that his systems were jammed and that continuing his approach was going to result in his aircraft being shot down, made a split-second decision. He pulled the stick back hard. The Su-30's nose came up sharply. The aircraft began to climb away from the destroyer. G-forces pressed against his body as he banked the fighter hard to port, trying to create distance between himself and the ship. The CIWS operators tracked his movement. The firing solution remained locked, but the shot never came. Because in that exact moment, Restrepo's wingman, flying a second Su-30, transmitted a distress signal that everything had gone wrong. The radar jamming from the Gonzales had spread across the communication networks, creating chaos in the Venezuelan flight group. Restrepo transmitted his own signal in clear. He was breaking off, he was aborting the approach. Commander Webb made the decision to hold fire. The contact was no longer in an active attack profile, it was climbing away and increasing distance. Holding fire at this point wasn't just following rules of engagement. It was the right call. The Su-30 continued climbing, putting more and more distance between itself and the destroyer every second. But as Restrepo climbed away, the electronic warfare systems were still active on both sides. The Su-30's radar was still being jammed. The aircraft was now at 2,000 meters altitude, moving away from the destroyer, but Restrepo's instruments were still showing corrupted data. The radar screens still showed false targets. His compass was spinning, his altitude indicator was giving conflicting readings, he was partially blind in his own cockpit. Then, the worst possible thing happened. The electronic jamming disrupted his navigation system so severely that Restrepo lost spatial awareness. He didn't know exactly where he was relative to the ocean surface below him. His instruments were unreliable. The sun was still hours away from rising. The darkness was total except for the glow of his cockpit instruments. He tried to climb to altitude to get away from the coastal terrain, but his instruments were lying to him. The altimeter showed one number, but the actual altitude was different. The Su-30 was descending, not climbing. It was getting closer and closer to the water below. Restrepo didn't realize it until the warning system started blaring. Terrain warning, low altitude warning. The aircraft was about to impact the ocean. There was no time for complex calculations. There was only time for one decision. Restrepo ejected. The canopy blew away from the cockpit. Explosive charges fired beneath his seat. In less than a second, Restrepo was rocketing out of the Su-30, separated from the aircraft by the ejection seat's rocket motor. Above him, the parachute deployed with a jolt that drove the wind out of his lungs. The Su-30 hit the water behind him in a massive explosion of spray and fire. The aircraft sank within seconds, taking with it millions of dollars worth of sophisticated Russian military hardware. Restrepo hung from his parachute, descending toward the dark water below. He had trained for water survival. He knew the procedures. But knowing procedures and actually doing them in the freezing Caribbean water in the middle of the night were two completely different things. His survival suit would keep him warm for several hours if the rescue came in time. He grabbed the toggle on his parachute to slow his descent. The water was getting closer. Closer, then his feet touched the surface. He splashed down hard and immediately began swimming away from his parachute, which could become an entanglement hazard. On the USS Gonzales, alarms were still sounding. The radar showed the contact had descended to sea level. Then it disappeared. The Combat Information Center fell silent. Officers looked at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. Then one of the sailors spotted something on the thermal imaging camera mounted on the bridge. A heat signature in the water. That was a human body temperature. Someone was in the water. Commander Webb didn't hesitate. He ordered the rescue operation immediately. Within 3 minutes, the Gonzales launched one of her rescue boats. The small inflatable craft sped across the dark water, searching for the heat signature. The thermal imaging camera guided them in the darkness. With only the guidance of the ship's systems, the rescue team spotted the parachute first, then the figure in the water. Restrepo was pulled aboard the rescue boat. He was shaking from cold and shock. His flight suit was soaked, but he was alive. The rescue team wrapped him in thermal blankets and rushed him back to the destroyer. Within 20 minutes, Restrepo was standing on the deck of the USS Gonzales, being treated by the ship's medical team. He was examined, given dry clothing, provided with hot food and water. And then something remarkable happened. Commander Webb came down to the medical bay personally. He didn't come down as an enemy, He came down as a naval officer, recognizing another naval officer who had just survived something terrifying. The two men talked for nearly an hour. Restrepo explained what had happened. He described the radar jamming, the lost instruments, the confusion in the darkness. Webb explained that the Venezuelan aircraft had been detected approaching in what appeared to be an aggressive profile. He described the defensive measures that had been taken. He explained why the jamming had occurred and why the CIWS systems had been activated. But more than anything else, what was communicated between them in that conversation was mutual respect. Both men understood that they had been doing their jobs. Both men understood that in the chaos of the moment, decisions had to be made in seconds. Both men understood that what had almost become a tragedy had instead become something else entirely. Restrepo was transferred to a Venezuelan rescue aircraft 3 hours later. His wingman had coordinated with US Navy operations to arrange a helicopter pickup. As Restrepo climbed aboard the Venezuelan helicopter, he shook hands with Commander Webb one more time. It was a moment that bridged the gap between potential enemies. It was a moment that showed that even in military conflict, humanity still exists. The Su-30 remained at the bottom of the Caribbean, a multi-million-dollar loss for the Venezuelan military. But the pilots returned home alive. The USS Gonzalez continued her patrol, and in the days that followed, diplomatic channels opened up between the two nations. The incident was officially characterized as a training exercise that had gone wrong. But everyone involved knew it was more than that. It was a moment where the right decisions, made in the chaos and tension of an international incident, resulted in lives saved instead of lives lost. Subscribe to see what happens when military systems fail and humanity takes over.